Let's take a look at triads and inversions from the simplest approach. We'll begin with the bass note, E. Note the key signature. To build a triad with E as the root, we need a third and a fifth. And now we have an E major triad in root position. Now if we want to invert the triad, we can move the E up an octave, and this gives us a first inversion triad. Now, more important than moving the E above is the fact that the G sharp is now the lowest note in the chord. In other words, it's the bass note. Now, if we rearrange the triad so that the B is the lowest note, we have a second inversion triad. Adding the figured bass, we label our root position triad with 5-3, indicating that we have a third and a fifth above the bass note E. The first inversion triad is labeled 6-3, since the bass note is now G sharp, the B is a third above the G sharp, and the E is a sixth above the G sharp. And finally, the second inversion chord has a fourth E and a sixth G sharp above the bass note B. In order to save some pen strokes, so to speak, we generally need not indicate the 5-3 for a root position triad. We simply assume a third and a fifth above the bass, given no other qualifications. Likewise, we abbreviate 6-3 with a 6. Note that we still need both the 6 and 4 under the second inversion triad. Now let's add some lead sheet chord symbols. Here's root position, E over G sharps showing first inversion, and E over B showing second inversion. The pitch below the slash is always the bass note. Now, this method we have just completed is the standard method for learning about inversions of triads in fundamentals textbooks primarily. But in practice, we have to be able to build and recognize inversions of triads in more general terms. Let's start with the bass note, and using figured bass conventions, build a chord. Here's the note E. Given no figures, we assume this is a root position triad. Let's add our third and fifth above the bass. How about we begin with the fifth B, add a third G sharp. Note that we have voiced the chord in an open position. This can make recognizing the triad a bit more difficult. It doesn't really matter, for now at least, how or where we place the third and fifth above the bass, as long as we have at least 1/3 and 1/5. Let's start again with our bass note, E. Add a third, and now let's put the fifth 2 octaves higher. With E as our bass note, we still have a root position triad. Again, let's go back to our closely spaced root position chord. If we place a G sharp below these 3 notes, we now have a first inversion triad, 6-3. Here's our sixth above the bass, and our third. And we have 1 note doubled. The point here is that it's all about the bass note, G sharp. Look at this example. Put the B in the bass, and now the triad is in second inversion. Theoretically, it doesn't matter where we place the pitches above the bass, or how many times they're doubled. In this case, we have 3/6, 3/3, and several doubled octaves with the bass. It's still just an E major triad in first inversion, simply because the third of the triad is the bass note. Now let's change the key signature and place a B in the bass. With no further details, we assume a root position triad. Here I have a third and a fifth above the bass, which completes the chord, and I have also doubled the root of the triad. I added the figures here to confirm our intervals. But now let's imagine that we are in the key of E minor. In this case, it's possible that we would want a B major triad instead of a B minor triad. This would give us a dominant triad labeled here with 5. In order to indicate this chord with figured bass, we must add a sharp in front of the 3. Now we know to raise the third by a half step. If we begin with an F sharp in the bass, place a 6 with a slash under it. The slash means the same thing as sharp. We know the figures are asking for a first inversion triad in which the 6th above the bass is raised by a half step. Remember, the third is understood. So we can place the D sharp above the bass, that's the raised 6th, and the A is our third above the bass, and I have also doubled the bass here. Now let's work in reverse order. We'll begin with the chord, and we want to understand first what position it's in, and second, what the root of the chord is. We need to analyze the intervals. Here we have a 6th above the bass, a third, and a doubled bass note. We need not account for the doubled notes in our figures. Therefore, we know we are looking at a 6/3 chord or a first inversion triad. How do we then determine the root? Well, if the third of the chord is in the bass, then by definition, the root of the chord must be a third below that bass note, in this case, A. We can test this by taking all the letter names of pitches in this chord and rearranging them in close position on one staff. Here the root appears at the bottom of the triad. If we're still in the key of E minor, we can then add a Roman numeral to our original chord. A is scale degree 4 in E minor, so we label the chord 4, 6, 3. Remember that Roman numeral analysis occupies its own line below the figures.